Hello, everybody. Welcome to the second class in a three-part series on the modalities of the 12 archetypes. Tonight's class is going to be on the fixed modality, which you can see is Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius. Before we get started on class, thank you for allowing us to go through a few housekeeping slides. Of course, at the Evolutionary Astrology Network, there are 4 different ways in which you can study astrology with us. You can listen to our free weekly audio podcasts. You can subscribe to one of the sections of our Astro Library, and you can become a student of evolutionary astrology, purchasing one of our multimedia course segments or pursuing certification. Our Astro Library is made up of 3 different sections. This is over 12 years of archived materials with dozens of evolutionary astrologers. You can see the different sections here. You can subscribe for 1 month, 6 months, 12 months, or you can get a monthly recurring subscription that you can cancel at any time. You can subscribe to Section 1, Understanding the Archetypes, Section 2, Understanding the Evolutionary Astrology Method with Pluto and the Nodes of the Moon, or Section 3, Everything Else, or all of the above. Our multimedia course is divided into 3 different segments. Segment 1, Philosophy, Archetypes, and Individuals. Segment 2 is Relationships, both intimate and familial, family, parent-child. And of course, segment 3 is Health and Wellness Astrology. You can see everything that you get. Access to DVDs for each segment. Segments 1 and 2 have the original school that Jeffrey Wolf Green taught as a transcript. You get access to 250 hours of audio files that Kim Marie taught from 2003 to 2013. And segment 1 and 2 have Facebook forums. Now, segments 1 and 2 also include free monthly webinar classes. You can ask for a free sample download of an actual class. And what we have going on during the month of October 2014 is you can receive $50 off on each of the course segments by entering the coupon code COURSE, COURSE, upon checkout. Here are future classes that we're offering at the Evolutionary Astrology Network, and as you can see, we are exploring the 3 modalities and the 4 elements in addition to other forecasting classes. You can jot these down if you want to, and you'll be able to get these classes on an individual basis as well as the entire series. And so here we are tonight with the fixed modality, again, Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius. And one of the things that I decided to do instead of going through the 12 archetypes was to look at the 12 archetypes through the polarities, modalities, and elements, which are the foundations upon how we get to the 12 archetypes. In evolutionary astrology, we will look at a sign, for instance, Aries, the natural house that it rules, for example, the first house, and its planetary ruler, Mars, as a single archetype in consciousness that is interchangeable. In other words, we do not look at the sign as being different than the house, even though when you look at a circle chart, the 12 houses, 1 through 12, are stationary, and the signs move around the circle of 12 houses, just as the Earth rotates on its axis, and we watch the 12 signs of the zodiac rise in the eastern horizon, set in the western horizon, just as we watch the planets that we can visibly see rise and set. And when you can understand that there are these 12 archetypes in consciousness, it takes some of the complications out of learning those 12 archetypes in astrology. Now, those 12 archetypes are interpreted through dividing that circle of 12 by 2, 3, and 4. It has more divisions than that, but when we start to divide that circle up, we will sometimes call that the harmonics of the numbers. So you're probably familiar in your astrological studies that 2 equals the polarities, active, passive. 3 equals the modalities, cardinal, fixed, mutable. 4 equals the elements, fire, earth, air, water. In addition to that, in astrology, we really focus on that cycle of aspects and phases, and there are 8 phases. New, crescent, first quarter, gibbous, full, disseminating, last quarter, and balsamic. And you can then take those 8 phases and you can further divide that circle all the way through the numbers 1 through 12. And that's going to equal all of the many aspects that you hear about in astrology. You can go beyond the 12, but most astrology will work with dividing that circle up to 12, 30 degrees each in the 360 circle, and working with the numbers 1 through 12, come up with all the aspects that are contained within the 8 phases that I just described. So when we look at that circle and we look at the harmonics of 1, the circle is no beginning, no end, no division of the circle. In astrology, we will call that the conjunction when 2 planets are within a few degrees of each other, usually evolutionary astrology within 10 degrees of each other. It gets further defined as whether or not it is a new phase conjunction or a balsamic conjunction. And for more detail, I refer you to segment 1 of our course materials that we work with. When we divide that circle in half, we call it the harmonics of 2. And so in astrology, we will take those 12 archetypes and divide them between the 2 polarities, active, passive, active, passive. And you can see that from this slide, where if you look at the 6 archetypes by either sign or house in the pink color, you will see we're looking at the active polarity, also known as yang energy, or energy moving outward from its center. If you look at the circle highlighted in blue by either sign or house, you're going to get the passive polarity, which is also known as yin, or energy moving back to the center. We'll also call that active or yang polarity masculine. We'll also call that passive or yin polarity feminine. In this case, with the polarities, we're not really speaking of gender. We're just speaking of an energy either moving outward and expanding or moving inward and contracting. We can also take the circle and divide it into thirds, the harmonics of 3. And when we do this, astrology divides those 12 archetypes into the 3 modalities. Now the modalities are known as a quality of action. And cardinal initiates, fixed sustains, and mutable adapts. Tonight we're going to focus on the fixed modality, and we'll get into that in just a moment. But before that, we also can divide the circle into quarters or 1/4. And when astrology does that, it takes the 12 archetypes and divides them into the 4 elements. And when we look at those 4 elements, we have fire, which is spirit, We have earth, which is physical. We have air, which is mental. And we have water, which is the emotions. Now we'll touch upon each of these four elements tonight as we go through the modalities, because as you go through this series of the three modalities and the four elements, you'll find that they're interchangeable when you're working with the interpretation of the 12 archetypes. We'll repeat this series after the modalities, working through the four archetypes of fire, earth, air, and water. And again, just repeating this for you for anybody who is brand new to astrology. The fire element is spiritual. It is the energetic source of everything. The earth element is physical, manifestation. The air is mental, the mind, and the water element is emotional. Now, I'll say this as a student of metaphysics for most of my life, I guess I would say. One of the things that I stumbled upon, and I don't even know how I learned it anymore, but I've been into spiritual studies and metaphysics and astrology for 30, 35 years now. And somewhere I stumbled across the fact that, first of all, it starts with energy. It starts with the spiritual modality, condenses down into the mental thought patterns, and then it condenses down into the emotions. And from that, we have a manifestation into the physical. So going from energy to form doesn't follow fire, earth, air, water. Now, this is true whether we're condensing it down into what we would label the manifestation of an imbalance or a dis-ease. It also is how we would label the miracles or the ability to really make those major shifts in our world. We change our belief. Beliefs are conditioned thoughts. So we change the energy around our beliefs, which then changes our mental world, our attitudes, our mental programming, which then changes our emotions, which then changes the manifestations, positive and negative. So I just share that tidbit with you to recognize that there is the mental emotional that comes between E equals MC squared or energy and matter or manifestation. And it follows in that order, even though astrology doesn't list the four elements in that order. What we're going to concentrate on tonight, though, is what we call the fixed modality. And as you can see to your left, as we take those three modalities or qualities of action and divide them up between cardinal, fixed, and mutable, the key element of fixed is the sustainment or perseverance. It is fixed energy. It is fixed action. And as you can see here, we have listed Leo, Scorpio, Aquarius, and Taurus. So to take this fixed modality one step further, what I like to then blend with that is the polarities and the elements. And if you were in last week's class, you would have noticed as we were working with the cardinal modality and the polarities, we went active, passive, active, passive. Tonight, working with the fixed modality, we start with a passive polarity. It shifts to active and then back and forth again. It also shifts the elements. Each of the fixed modality archetypes contains one of the four elements. And now we'll work in detail with Taurus as passive polarity earth element. We'll repeat this list right here for you one at a time. and we'll work with key phrases and archetypes of the 12 archetypes in understanding these fixed modality signs or houses or archetypes. First of all, a few keywords on the fixed modality, and this list is by no means inclusive or absolute. It is just some key phrases to activate your understandings of what we're talking about by fixed action, fixed modality. It basically is to sustain, to persevere, to maintain the energy in the same quality of action. And what you're going to find with that fixed modality, and again, referring you to last week working with the cardinal modality and that impulsiveness and that energy to race forward, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. As that energy shifts into the fixed modality, it slows it down. It becomes the steady eddy. And what happens with fixed modality archetypes, be sign, house, or even the planet related to that, is that we start to take the time to consider the action before we make any change, before we move into action, before we take any action at all. And any of you who have strong Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, Aquarius in your chart can recognize that you'll sometimes ponder, and we'll ponder through the 4 elements. Spirit, mental, emotional, physical. We'll ponder through those 4 elements and how we want to change before we actually do it. And the reason for that is that the fixed modality is very concerned with security. It wants to stabilize things. It wants things to become smoother, to just flow with that energy rather than being all over the place, which both cardinal and mutable quality can do. The fixed modality is also building upon anything that cardinal has started. If you will notice that that cardinal modality was Aries, Cancer, Libra, Capricorn, you find that Taurus follows Aries, Leo follows Cancer, Scorpio follows Libra, and Aquarius follows Capricorn. So the fixed modality follows whatever cardinal initiated. And so the fixed modality's job is to build the new. It's to build it up. And eventually, the fixed modality has got to surrender to the mutable modality and learn how to change again and adapt. And what we'll move into at the end of the month when we have the mutable modality is that mutable is then going to build upon the initiation of cardinal and the sustainment of fixed and put it all together. And then the cycle repeats itself again. And so one of the things to remember about that fixed modality is it wants to maintain the energy flowing is that the fixed modality gets very invested in building things. It's a goal achiever. And so we want that security, but we want that security over the space-time medium in order to get to the end of something, in order to build something or achieve something. So this is again, foundational energy that we're now going to fine-tune through looking at 4 of the archetypes in the next few hours. The first modality that we will look at under the fixed modality is Taurus. And as we understood before, it's the passive polarity, which is energy moving back to the center, which makes it attractive, which makes it yin energy. It magnetizes it towards us. And we're working with that earth element, which is physical. So for a moment, just think about all of the initiations of Aries as the first archetype of 12 in the zodiac. And you can have all of the cardinal bursts of energy you want through Aries. But if Aries doesn't survive through Taurus, it doesn't mean anything. So as the fixed modality Taurus follows cardinal modality Aries, it gets very interested in the survival instinct, in being able to make it through and sustain whatever was initiated. And of course, that earth element is physical. It is manifested into this world of phenomenal reality. And so this is why this Taurus archetype can be just totally consumed with being able to survive in the physical world, earth element. Now, all of the fixed modalities, again, change is slow. And it must be processed before it's acted upon. In the Taurus archetype with the earth element, what is processed through is our physical stuff, our resources, our possessions, whatever has manifested in our world. Polarity Scorpio, that includes any of our relationships. Anything that we have been able to sustain beyond its initial manifestation becomes what we process through. How many of you know someone with a lot of planets in Taurus or a lot of planets in the second house or a gazillion aspects to Venus? And they really have to slowly, methodically, just consider everything in their world before they change it. That is that fixed modality coming through the archetype of Taurus Venus. This is being able to go, wait a minute, I am surviving, I am here, I am okay, I can sustain myself. So when we look at that archetype of Taurus in second house as being self-reliance, that ability to take care of any needs that we have, food, clothing, shelter, survival needs, and beyond that, then the wants, the luxury needs, you see that we're relating it back to that fixed modality. What can happen to this archetype, Taurus, second house, Venus, is that it gets so good at sustaining, it will get stuck in its world. It will get stuck in its box. Those of you who are familiar with the teachings of Jeffrey Green, he will call it the frog in the well syndrome. Imagine a frog. It jumped into the bottom of a well. It can see that circle of bricks around it, feels very good, feels very secure, feels very comfortable. It looks up out of the well and it sees the circle of the sky and the circle of the world above it, and it sees it all and it feels okay. Well, what will happen through that Scorpio polarity, which will work with that modality in a few moments, is that the frog gets thrown out of the well And all of a sudden, that little circle of the world is a whole hemisphere, and everything else has to be taken into consideration. The comfortable world of sustainment is thrown upside down. So when you evolve that archetype of Taurus, second house, and Venus, what you really are working towards with the fixed modality is to be able to have an inner sustainment. So the self-reliance is not just the world of stuff. It is the inner world of recognizing that we can attract and achieve anything that we need in order to survive and manifest. So the Taurus modality is an attractor magnet on some of the deepest levels. We are attracting in resources, food, clothing, shelter, stuff, money, possessions, all the things that we know with a Taurus. And again, the thing to always be careful with the fixed modality is becoming too attached to the energy just being that steady eddy, whatever it is, with the four elements. Taurus being the passive polarity, it's not going to be real active in throwing it off. Passive polarity, attracting energy inward. I'm attracting more stuff. I'm attracting more resources, attracting more people, and just let me have that status quo. And so there becomes this need for Taurus energy to make the effort to either let go of its resources and stuff or realize that it is more than that. Now, in each of these, I put down just a few keywords for distortions of this modality of the 12 archetypes. And again, this is not an inclusive list. This is just a few keywords to juggle our imagination or jumpstart our imaginations. Now you know why Taurus is called stubborn. It's the fixed modality. Now you know why it has inertia, lethargy, possessiveness. Those key words are coming from a modality of energy that is very fixed. And so as we did last week, what I am going to do is use some chart example. And again, this is not a thorough example. These classes are more or less really just trying to get us to focus the 12 archetypes through either the modalities or in the series to follow through the elements. Modalities, quality of action, elements, a temperament or disposition of energy. And so I'm staying with the entertainment world. It's what I was looking at as I was prepping these 3 classes. And this actor, it just so happens my 4 examples tonight are all male. Not trying to say anything from a gender perspective. I already have some females picked out for next week. I thought, okay, I better do 2 and 2. And then as I was doing my research, it was like, no, these people really are showing this modality. And so I invite all of you to see past the gender of the male examples tonight. This guy's in the news, Robert Downey Jr. And in this example, what we are going to be looking at is planets in the second house, the natural Taurus house, and planets in the sign of Taurus. Now, probably the thing that you might hear about Robert Downey Jr., especially in most recent news, is that he is the highest paid actor in the world at this moment. He has 6 movies that have each grossed over $500 million. People going to the movies to watch him act. He has 2 movies that have each grossed over $1 billion. He's most famous lately for the Iron Man series. Has there been 3 of those movies, I think? And the Sherlock Holmes series. Leroy and I loved the Sherlock Holmes series. We even own those 2 movies, giving Robert some of his second house wealth and resources, not to mention his Jupiter in Taurus up there at the top of his chart. Um, what might not be so well known, well, the other thing well known about him is his drug addiction issues and how he has overcome his addiction issues and sobered himself up and is now able, I think if I remember in my notes, he has been substance free since 2003. So that's basically 13 years that he's been substance free. That's a whole Jupiter cycle. There is a note for that Jupiter and Taurus up at the 10th house, combining the cardinal modality, taking charge of sustaining where he is choosing to grow and evolve, Jupiter Taurus. The thing that is not well known about him is both his father and mother um, were actors, and his father was also a drug addict, and his father introduced him to marijuana at 6 years old. And Robert is known for sharing that his bonding with his father of drugs and alcohol was going strong and well by the time he was 8, 9 years old. That's how he bonded with his father. When his father wanted to get him high, give him a drink, that was how they bonded. Again, go back to this modality of Taurus, and we want to have that sustainment. And once we are beyond sustaining physically our essential needs, which we would know as food, clothing, and shelter, we come to the finer needs or wants. And Taurus will sometimes be known as going to excess. If a little money is good, a lot of money is better. If a little food's good, a lot of food is better. And so as I was looking at him as an example for this archetype, I thought, wow, talk about survival. How many children get introduced to drugs and alcohol that young? Many of us have a teenage rebellion that goes on, but rarely do we have it 6, 7, 8 years old when it is still a primal bonding. You can look at Neptune, Scorpio, 4th house if you want some more information, making a pretty tight opposition to that moon in Taurus. So you can see some distortions there about what it really means to be able to sustain ourselves and survive in that early environment. 4th house, moving off of that cardinal modality from last week. But a 2nd house Pluto, for those of us in evolutionary astrology, you know, they either have survival issues in being able to just pay the rent, or in the case of this example, which many of us know this name, there is more wealth than he knows what to even do with. So we're seeing the excesses of the earth element through that Taurus modality. And we're also seeing, in many ways, also that ability to persevere. In other words, he, for many years in the late 90s, early 2000s, very gifted actor. He's won various awards. He's been nominated for awards in both TV and movies. He was in and out of rehab. He was in and out of jail. Look at that as a fixed modality. But he was able to eventually overcome it. And he's been able since then to really sustain that ability to be substance free. And again, he's moved past an entire Jupiter cycle, referring back to Jupiter in the Taurus archetype and combining it with Jupiter in the 10th house, that cardinal archetype of taking charge on a physical level. There's a double earth element with his Jupiter archetype here, being able to actually live and sustain himself. Again, as anybody wants to, there's much you can see in this chart. I could go into the entire chart and the planets square the nodes. Those of you who've been studying astrology for a while might see some of the skip steps, might see the initiations of Aries in the 9th house, being able to really move out of that fixed energy of a 2nd house Pluto. We're not looking at an entire chart. You are welcome to free associate on yourselves into more and more depth of the chart. I'm using these examples to just really try and point out the Taurus modality and that fixed energy that we have in the whole energy of Earth. And now that he's substance free for a Jupiter cycle, if he remains substance free, I think what we could look at, and of course those of you who know EA, I suspect that we might have someone here who Mars, Uranus, balsamic Pluto, yes, Mars first, but the rest of it moving into that 2nd house Pluto energy. It's quite possible that now that he's got his act together, he might keep it together. And if that's the case, it is quite possible we shall see a very long, sustained career for him in all kinds of areas, all kinds of acting. He's just moving into, for those of you who are following the world of the movies. Leroy and I are not big movie goers, but as a side note, we went to Gone Girl last weekend. We treated ourselves to a movie. I think we see about one a year. We wait for the on demand to come out in the comfort of our own home. But we saw some previews to Robert Downey's movie The Judge, in which he takes on a dramatic role versus the superhero in Iron Man, Aries planet's 9th house. And, you know, you look at those cardinal planets, Moon, Jupiter, up there in the 10th house, which is many times judging. He's now moving into the role of drama. He has before, but he's now taking it on as he's been able to, again, become substance free and move his life together. We will many times look at the archetype of Pisces 12th house and Neptune as substances, but it can very much belong into Taurus with the excess of earth and Scorpio with the excess of emotions as well. I kind of come from the perspective that you can see substance abuse from any of the 12 archetypes, but don't neglect the fixed modality, getting into it and then getting quote unquote stuck in it and needing a major catharsis to move beyond it. And so before I move in, let me just check in and see for a moment, does anybody have questions on the Taurus modality before I move on?
Not on the board, Kim. I'm just kind of curious. You got four retrograde planets in the first quarter of the chart. I wonder what effect that has, or if there is any effect. I'll defer to you on probably the personal Achilles heel in this soul's journey, which is the drug addiction. Also indicated by maybe that Chiron new phase Saturn in the eighth, the fixed house, the
Mm-hmm.
eighth house. Do you
Mm-hmm.
see anything in that, or am I just um,
Well, first of all, the first thing you mentioned is retrogrades. If you want to include Mercury, there's 5 planetary
oh,
retrogrades.
yeah, thank you.
And of course, this is a 1965 chart. And so we're looking at Saturn and Chiron in Pisces opposing Uranus, Pluto, and Virgo, and they're square the nodes. And what we need to look at, though, with those 5 planetary retrogrades, half of the major 10 planets, quote unquote, in astrology, is that this is a relived lifetime. My guess is the last time around he wasn't able to sustain himself. He didn't make it past the addictions the last time around. And so here he is, he comes around again, and with 5 planets retrograde, a lot of the life is relive, redo, repeat.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in my notes, I really didn't see a lot about Robert as a philanthropist. Again, the gentleman I think made $75 million last year. And so it will be it will remain to be seen if whether or not with the relive of the retrogrades and the sharing of all the Taurian wealth of resources, whether or not he finds some area of philanthropy in which he might become active. The thing that to me, that would be most likely, and again, looking at the wounds of Chiron, Saturn in Pisces, in fixed houses, is that, again, many, many lifetimes of substance abuse.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And yet, what we're also looking at is the fact that this is not his first attempt to move beyond the substance addiction either. That's the relive of the retrogrades, and that is the planets that are square the nodes. And 4 of those 5 planets square the nodes are in fixed houses.
Mm-hmm.
So can he actually sustain that ability to move beyond the addiction this time around? And can he then metamorphose that? We'll look at the Scorpio polarity of Taurus as a modality here in um, a couple examples from now. Can that become an area where he really becomes an example for the world? Stay tuned. We don't know yet. We'll find out. That would be one of the most natural areas for him to give back with all the excess of resources that this person has accumulated.
Gotcha. Let's take a question from the board. I have a hand raised here from Pamela. I'm going to assume that she's mic'd up. Let's see. Pamela, go ahead. Oh, there was a hand there, but I don't think Pamela's mic'd up. You'd need a USB headset or an earbud in your computer in order to communicate, Pamela. So just FYI.
Yes, for anybody, you're always welcome to raise your hand in these webinars and ask questions. It's just that it's easiest if you find yourself a headset that has a USB connection to connect into your computer or laptop, or else a really good iPhone that connects into your iPad device. Otherwise, you're welcome to ask your questions through the Q&A with Leroy.
You said iPhone. Of course, you meant earbuds for an iPhone. Work very
Earbuds.
well. And
Yes,
any
thank you.
little 1/8 connector device that fits into your laptop will work. USB headsets are always appreciated because the sound quality is so superior. So Pamela, if you have something you want to ask of Kim, you can just go ahead and type it into that Q&A board, the questions board. You find that on your control panel by expanding that little orange arrow. Let's see if that works for you, and I'll just have Kim move on for now.
All right. So now let's look at that fixed modality, which of course we know as the archetype of Leo. And here we're switching back to the active polarity. So we have energy moving out from the center. We have initiation, and it's with the fire element. And of course, fire is related to spirit. So it is that spark of life, that spark of energy. And so what we have here with the fixed modality through the Leo archetype is a modality that's very excitable. However, due to that active polarity, it is also extinguishable. Just think for a moment with the fire element. How many times have you watched fire, be it through a candle, be it through a fireplace or an actual, fire pit, or watching a forest fire rage? I mean, it's all consuming. It brings about that death and rebirth. But it can feel like we're never going to see the end of it, and it can go out. This is the interplay between polarity and element with the fixed modality. And so what happens is that fire or spirit element is sometimes called life force. And many times with the fixed modality, life force is strong. And it's some of its strongest through the archetype of Leo. And you see that through its rulership of Leo in the 12th house with the sun. Just think of the sun as the center of our solar system. Without its life force or vitality, nothing here would exist. None of us would be alive on planet Earth. At least we wouldn't be alive in the form that we are. And so what you can find looking at that fixed modality is a life force that can be very, very strong, very persevering. That magnetism of Leo or strong sun aspects that you'll see, or non-existent, a life force that's just not there. That's one of the distortions of the fixed modality through the archetype of Leo. And this is why so much about evolutionary astrology is observe and correlate. You can't look at some of these key words, phrases, archetypes with any of the 12 archetypes in consciousness and make an assumption. Sometimes when you see a lot of people, or sometimes when you see people with a lot of planets in Leo or the 5th house, or a lot of aspects to the sun, you've got to really observe, is that life force strong? Is it just sustaining? Or is it not there? And is the ability to sustain the life force just, again, non-existent? And they have all that Leonian or 5th house or sun energy because they're trying to develop that. Now, this is true of any of the 12 archetypes. Is it expressing or is it distorted? Do they have those archetypes because they're trying to develop it? Related to the element of fire, that archetype of Leo is creativity, creative self-actualization, and how the fixed modality comes in with that creativity is it becomes all-consuming. It's everything. My life is about what I can create with this archetype. That fixed modality is just going out there again and again and again to try and become whoever it is I came here to be, to try and create whatever I'm here to create. So we're trying to have a sustainment through that spark of spirit, fire element. And it's very active through that polarity. What will happen here then is, and this is where the Leo archetype feeds off of the Taurian or Taurus modality, is that there is an element of resourcefulness that will come through in all kinds of ways, through all kinds of circumstances. These are people in which that fixed modality is saying, I've got what it takes to not only sustain and survive Taurus, I've got what it takes to create and be and become and just do whatever excites me, fire element. So this fixed modality is just adding that sustaining energy to life, to creativity, to being. So this is where we can get some of these key words for this archetype of the leader, the visionary, being inspiring, being enthusiastic, magnetic. All of the fixed modalities can almost be magnetic. And even though this is active polarity, this is the fire element, and this is where the magnetism can start to come in. So these are people who sustain that ability to just go out there in the world and do and be. They're not like Taurus, content to sit alone at home in their or on their in their little cocoon and comfort zone. These guys want to be out there doing it. Active polarity fire element. And they've got that sustainability to just keep going and going and going until they get there. Sometimes what you'll find with this fixed modality of the Leo archetype is that they can have such a strong willpower that it can seem to be overpowering others. Or it can be the distortion. There's no will power, and everybody else overpowers them. Typically, again, you will see a very strong willpower and a very strong energy that just goes and goes and goes, sustaining itself, especially with the element of creativity, the spark of fire. Now, a few key words with the distortions: drama. I will sometimes say drama trauma, taking in the Aquarius polarity. There can be selfishness that can relate many times to the childishness. This is the archetype of Leo coming off of the cardinal modality Cancer with the early environment. And if that Cancer environment did not learn the water element of emotional self-reliance, then as it moves into the Leo element with the fixed modality, there can be all the childish temper tantrums. There can be that selfishness, that strong life force is just so full of ego and self, there's no ability to notice anybody else. And if they're not being noticed, if they're not the center of attention, if they're not the center of the universe, they can become the risk taker. That drama goes out there so much. I'm going to do whatever it takes to get your attention, and I'm going to do it fixed modality until I do get your attention. Many of these distortions are the unevolvement of the fixed modality. As it evolves, again, it learns to recognize and relate to that earth element sustaining self from within, and that act of polarity, there's a sustainment of that energy being able to move outward. It sources itself from within and becomes, again, the leader, the visionary, the one who can inspire others versus drawing the attention. So you begin to see how that fixed modality really can sustain that spark of fire and inspiration through Leo, fifth house, and the ruler, the sun. So looking for an example of this in um, my charts of entertainers, what sparked me was Bruce Springsteen. And this is someone who knew that he wanted to be a guitar player from a very, very early age. His mother bought him his first guitar at 13 years old. And what you're going to see here is you got two planets in Leo, Pluto in Leo. The Pluto in Leo generation, by the way, is just a generation of creative souls. You start going through the entertainers of the world, and you know how many Pluto and Leos you can come up with? A ton of them. What attracted me was four planets and the South Node in the fifth house, the archetype of the Leo house. That was what was drawing me when I looked at his chart. When I started researching his background, again, that sense of wanting to be a guitar player very early on and literally telling somebody when he was a teenager, young teenager, I will be famous as an artist someday and I will make it big. Leo, all the way over the top. Not only that, another tidbit that I thought was kind of interesting about him is he's been touring for, oh gosh, I don't know how long, since the 70s. Bruce Springsteen, no, since the 60s, excuse me. And he is well known for having 3+ hours of concerts. You don't get a short Bruce Springsteen concert. He doesn't come on the stage, do a few songs, and leaves. He comes on the stage and gives you 3+ hours of music. How many entertainers in the musical world of singing do that? Not very many of them. Most of them, they'll probably do that minimum of what they can do, and then boom, that's it. Now, his first album that he really made it big with was Born to Run, and that was followed up with Born in the USA. And so he's well known for having his spark of inspiration be a lot of what we would call Americana music, or really being able, even though he's made it so big, he had very what you will call blue collar beginnings. His father was basically unemployed most of the time. His mother was a blue collar worker and took out loans to literally buy him guitars. So he had those humble beginnings. And something about him, and we might be following back into another second house Pluto here of really wanting to work with the host sustainment issue, but his his music is always very inspirational for the blue collar. It's inspirational for everybody. And having 11th house Aquarius polarity to all those fifth house planets, you know, what is good for the common person, Aquarius, what's good for the community and the tribe. Lots of times you'll see that polarity come through with any of the archetypes that is very strong. Here's something about Leonian over the top, just tidbits. I just thought it fit with this Leo fifth house archetype. He had an enormous unheard of budget at the time to record his big album, Born to Run. The album took more than 14 months to record. It took 6 months alone to fine tune that song, Born to Run. I remember that song. I remember that album. I was one of the first albums I bought in my freshman year of college. And I remember I can see the picture today of the album bookstore in my college town and looking at all those albums up on the wall. They would stack them vertically. Um, I mean, this was, way before CDs. We were just coming off of 8 tracks, dating myself. And I remember just being attracted to that album cover and the title and buying it and just it being one of my favorite albums in my freshman year of college. Leo, heading off to be creative, feeling my freedom, fire element. And so just so relating to that. Now, another thing about Bruce Springsteen and all that creativity with Mars, Pluto, Leo, and those 4 planets South Node in the fifth house. He was also known for being a songwriter who provided hits for other bands. That's those fifth house planets being tempered by the cardinal modality of Libra, sharing the creativity. Anybody remember Manfred Mann's Earth Band and the song Blinded by the Light? I love that song. Bruce Springsteen wrote that for him. Anybody remember Patti Smith and because because of the night? Bruce Springsteen wrote that one. And the Pointer Sisters did one of his songs, the song Fire. And there are a couple of other of them that I really don't know, but again, I remembered all 3 of those, and so there again, that fifth house energy being tempered by the cardinal modality of Leo. In the story of romance, I can remember him getting some press because he, quote unquote, had an affair with the Patty, I'm not going to pronounce this, Scalfala? Anyway, she was a backup singer in his band. And, the getting called out on having an affair with her. Well, what I found in researching my notes, Leo, love affairs, was that he had met her first. Everybody thought they were going to get together. A bandmate introduced him to another woman. He ended up marrying her spur of the moment. It was a short-lived marriage. They had a big age difference. She didn't like him traveling. Patty came on the road with his band, and he had separated from the first wife. They were in process of being divorced before he took up with the Patty who sang as a backup in his band. So you know that fixed energy, Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and the whole love affair thing that can sometimes go on with that. He had that share of it in his world as well. And Leroy, when we were prepping, you were talking about a quote that he had made, and I am looking for it. Just a minute. Do you remember that what it was? Did you find that quote? It was something about him saying, how can somebody tell me who to love? How can somebody decide who I'm going to love?
Yeah, it was a typical fixed energy quote about that whole reality of arranged
Oh,
relationships versus what did it say? You found it? My sheets are
it's a
upstairs.
yeah, it's a strange society that assumes it has the right to tell people publicly. No, it's a strange society that assumes it has the right to tell people whom they should love and whom they shouldn't. I thought that was interesting.
So he felt
And
influenced. He felt
that's that.
so that
No,
reveals to me
he
that
felt judged.
judged or
He felt
influenced by
judged.
somebody, right? And that fixed energy
Yeah,
showed up
yeah.
to overcome that.
Well, And here's Leo, fifth house, saying, "Who are you to tell me who to love?" And you could also see some of that Libra energy in there as well with those fifth house planets, of being able to, to compare and contrast and say, I'm going to decide for myself who I'm going to love. And of course, the press was all, seeing and hearing and perceiving one thing without knowing what was really going on. You can see the Scorpio polarity to that. You can see the Libra hearing one thing without hearing perhaps what was really the truth about everything. So, that's about all of my the comments that I shall make, other than finishing up with saying that what we have here with two planets in Leo and in fixed houses, and then four planets south node in Leo house, fifth house, is that this is someone who has had a very, very long, sustaining, creative career. And he has brought out album after album after album. And just when you think he's going to fade into the sunset, here he comes with another album that just breaks it out. Oh, I remember what I was going to say with this. This is that fixed energy, bigger, better, more. Um, Hold on a second. I will, I had it from the very beginning. So, um, his albums, Born in the USA, Born to Run. He is the 15th highest selling artist of all time in the United States, and he is one of the world's best-selling artists of all times. The guy has sold over 120 million records worldwide. So it doesn't say where he is in the top artist of the world, whether he's top 5 or top 3 or, whatever. But he is, again, one of the best artists and has been that way for a long, long period of time. Here's one more tidbit of him. He decided to take up music at age 7 after seeing Elvis Presley on the Ed Sullivan Show, 1956. 13, his mother brought him a guitar. At 14, he saw the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show. And from that moment on, he decided to start playing in public as a guitar player and was determined that he could do the same thing. That's that. There's that fifth house Leonian creativity.
Comparing himself to these other artists, Libra energy, fifth house,
Libra, fifth house.
and
Yes.
and then having to sustain, whether it's top 10, top 15, it's still a pretty strong ability to manifest a long-standing career for sure.
Right. Yes. And yes, everybody, I'm using well-known examples as we're going through this series. Again, part of my reasoning for doing this is because these are people that we all know, and I'm just bringing you tidbits of their environmental backgrounds, environmental conditionings, as we call it in EA, or what they have done in the world of quote-unquote entertainment, because it allows all of us to easily recognize them, and it allows us to see an example of these archetypes through them. Now, obviously, not everybody who has the fixed modality of Leo is going to be as successful as him, but you see the example of what I'm getting at with the energy.
Kim, you want to take a little break while I give everybody a pop quiz?
Sure. All right. I'll be right back. I'm going to you know what as I set my headset down.
Okay. All right, everybody out there. I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll, as we call it in the webinar world, but basically it's a pop quiz on our subject matter tonight. I hope everybody can see that on their screen as I launch this poll. And I'll invite you to just respond to the answer that applies most. What quality of energy would not apply to this fixed archetype we're discussing tonight? So select one of the following. Would that quality of energy not applying to the fixed archetype be self-reliance, steadfastness, psychic, awareness, or perseverance? All right, about half of you have voted so far, and thank you for the quick response. It's pretty much of a layup here if you've even been breathing during this webinar, no doubt. So thank you. Looks like we're closing out. About 85% of you have voted. All right, so I'll go ahead and close the poll and share the results. And of course, as you can see, psychic awareness would not really apply to the fixed archetype. I think most of us would know that that might be Piscean, maybe a little Sagittarian, certainly in that mutable world.
Oh, I'm so going to prove you wrong.
Oh, okay. Well, that sounds like a fixed archetype in and of itself.
I didn't hear what the poll was. All I did is come in on the last sentence. Fill me in.
What quality of energy would not apply to the fixed archetype, Kim? Would it be self-reliance, steadfastness, psychic awareness, or perseverance?
Oh, media monk. Let's move on to the next. Let's move on to the next modality. Okay.
All right.
It's the water element that I think brings the greatest level of intuitive or psychic awareness. And then having said that, you have intuition with the fire element. So, I might have to look at them poll questions. All right, moving on to the fixed modality here, we're going to look at the archetype of Scorpio, 8th house, and ruler Pluto. And so now we shift the polarity back to passive again, which is energy moving back to the center. And here we're going to move on to the element of water, which is the emotions. So with the Scorpio fixed modality, we have a fixed energy that is emotionally persevering. Whereas Taurus earth element persevered physically, Leo fire element persevered spiritually, inspirationally. With Scorpio fixed modality, it becomes the emotions. And basically what Scorpio, 8th house Pluto wants to do with the fixed modality is control everything. It wants the emotions to be stable in order to feel safe, in order to feel in charge. Think of water. The element of water goes wherever it can. Water has to run into a container to stop it. And so when you look at fixed modality, water element, Scorpio, the emotions become a container in and of themselves. And it becomes controlling the emotions, steady emotions, fixed emotions, sustaining, persevering emotions, all those words we've been talking about. And so those emotions become very steadfast. They don't change very fast. And that's where you can hear about that Scorpio archetype, that it can be so passionate, so loyal, so, all consuming on an emotional level. And this is where, I use the word intuition with Scorpio rather than psychic, And it might be possible they're a little interchangeable. But when you take that emotional energy of the water element and you just focus it, that's where that fixed modality Scorpio can just go beneath the surface, or it just concentrates and focuses on such a level that they cut to the chase on the emotional level. They cut to the chase on the senses, especially the emotional senses. They cut to the chase on the intuition. That's where Scorpio gets that why. Why this, why that? And they focus that emotional energy just intently, fixedly, and get to a core essence of the emotions. They get to the emotional aha. And so, whatever is of emotional interest to the Scorpio archetype, they become very sustaining with, they become very ambitious around, they become focused on it. So how many times with a Scorpio, yes, it's where we merge with another. So there can be that whole fixity on emotions in relationships and just fixed on relationships, sustaining relationships. But it's not limited to that. Scorpio is shared resources, and even deeper than that. If Scorpio energy, fixed emotion, sets a goal around anything, they focus on it emotionally until it comes into manifestation. And I draw you back to what I said earlier, in that we start with spirit. We start with the fire element, the spiritual concept or spark, and we condense it down into the thoughts, the mental patterns, the air element, and we condense that down into the emotions, and the emotions gives the juice to energizing it physically. This is sustained emotions with Scorpio. And so the archetype of Scorpio around the fixed modality, it doesn't change the emotions very fast. It has to process through them. It has to really experience them. It has to slowly but surely move through them. And eventually it does. And when the fixed modality Scorpio water element moves through it, when they're done, they're done. And you've heard that Scorpio, until death us do part. They'll stay in a relationship way past the time that they should. They'll stay in a job way past the time it served its interest and goals. The thing that gets the Scorpio archetype to change those fixed emotions is when it's ran to the end of the emotional road, and then boom, that fixed energy goes, it does a 180 shift, and it's gone. It's done. There's no second chances with Scorpio. Now, when it gets into the distortions of this fixed modality, you see the words obsessive compulsive, going to the emotional extremes. Now, it's passive polarity, so energy is moving back to the center, just like the Taurus modality. If that energy in the center isn't self-sustaining, then Scorpio archetype moves into its vulnerability. It moves into its fears. It moves into its mistrust. It moves into its suspicion. It moves into its ability to feel, again, safe in its world. And so on some of the deepest levels possible, or that evolutionary process with the Scorpio archetype, what we've got to do is have an inner control. We have to feel safe inwardly. We have to take that emotional environment and feel safe within ourselves emotionally. And then we can sustain ourselves around everything. We can sustain ourselves through the long haul of whatever we're trying to energize emotionally on a desired nature. This is the archetype of desires, separating desires, returning desires. Well, a desire has no energy if there isn't any emotion behind it. And with the Scorpio archetype and the fixed modality, it is fixed emotions. It's sustaining the emotions with the water element. So my example here again is another male in the entertainment world, and I'm not looking at, just to state this for clarity, I'm not looking at the element of Scorpio in its completeness. I'm not looking at the archetype of Scorpio in its completeness. I'm looking at Scorpio through the fixed modality, and so that's kind of, as I'm going through the fixed modality, that's why you see me go through these 4 archetypes: Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, Aquarius, and I'm concentrating on the key words that'll hone us back in to that persevering action. So here's an example that maybe it probably isn't the highest and best of the Scorpio 8th house fixed modality. This is Charlie Sheen, the actor. And as you can see by this example, we're looking at 2 planets in Scorpio: Mars, balsamic Neptune, and we're looking at Moon in the 8th house. And then you can see it's got an opposition to Jupiter. And if you want to use really wide orbs, you could almost see a grand cross in the mutable signs and the fixed modality. And what I was keying in on is, again, some of the sensationalism of how he has been in the news for the last few years. He comes from a family of actors. His father's an actor. He has 2 older brothers and a younger sister, and they're all actors. He was quite successful as an actor early on, coming up through an acting family where he really got the attention, let's say, is the fact that he became famous in the TV sitcom 2.5 Men. I've never seen the sitcom. I would say that maybe I've seen 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there, as maybe we were flipping channels. But I became aware of it through his extremes in what he went through. The TV show 2.5 Men, I think it's him and a brother on TV, and the TV brother had a young boy, and the half a man was the young boy. And it's loosely based on Charlie's own life. And he was just known as being the extremist, Scorpio, the emotional extremist. And what happened is the show was wildly successful, but here again, another addiction issue, and he has long had issues of alcohol and drug abuse addictions, in and out of rehab, in and out of legal issues, and he couldn't keep himself together long enough to keep filming the show. And it started in 2003, and he eventually was fired in 2011 because he was unsuccessful with his third attempt at rehab in 12 months. And so they just canceled the show, and he went off the deep end, Scorpio, the distortions of that emotional energy, and started lambasting the station, the series creator, the producers behind it, just basically was going off the deep end. Scorpio, Mars, look at that, Mars, Neptune in Scorpio in the sixth house, tempering that. If I'm going to go through criticizing, I'm going to go over the top with criticizing. Get this. During his last season on Two and a Half Men, it was the 8th season, he was earning $1.8 million per episode. Every time they filmed one of those 30-minute, half-hour comedy shows with him in it, he got paid $2 million. There's some of the Scorpio excess of resources. And so when he was fired from the show, he had a highly publicized meltdown that was broadcast on television and the internet. He was making statements that he was a warlock with tiger blood, he had Adonis DNA, and he's tired of pretending he's not special. Look at a fifth house Pluto, going back to the Leo modality. But what you were saying earlier, Leroy, with the fixed modality not being psychic, yes, intuitive. And you looked at that Mars, Neptune in Scorpio. There was somebody who could be very intuitive and very psychic, but just, going to extremes with it. Not only that, if you want to look at that archetype, and you can also see that through that Moon-Jupiter opposition. Yes, it's in Sag, Mercury, Moon in Sag, Mercury in Gemini, so you can see the verbosity that starts to go on there, but it gets sustained through that 8th second, and if a little is good, more is better. And so he starts spouting out off at the mouth, and he can't contain it. Well known for the anger issues, and as a matter of fact, he eventually went on. He now has a new TV program called Anger Management, again based upon him and his anger issues. I hear you, Leroy. Did you want to say something? Okay, never mind.
No, that wasn't me. That's you.
Okay. Sometimes I hear that noise going in and out. He also, going to the Scorpio archetype of shared resources and the commitment to sustain a relationship with another, that fixed modality of committing in marriage type relationships that the Scorpio modality can relate to. He's been in and out of trouble with his marriages. He's been married 3 times. He has 5 kids, 1 grandchildren. When I did my research, it listed like a half a dozen women he's been involved with, and they've all been either, they call them adult film actresses on Wikipedia. They don't call it porn. And I thought, ooh, Scorpio. That's interesting. And in his relationships, especially the last 2 people he was married to, which was Denise Richards, she accused him of alcohol, drug abuse, and threats of violence. And then he married Brooke Mueller and children with both of them. I think they both had restraining orders out on him. They both accused him of violence. So there's that, again, fixed water, just going to all of the emotional extremes. And really, in my notes, I never saw anything in which he was apologetic except for his cast on Two and a Half Men. He did make a public, I don't know so much if it was an apology to them as that he meant no harm, and he wished them all the best as Ashton Kutcher, I think it was, took his place in Two and a Half Men. The show's still on TV, and he wished all his fellow actors all the best, but never apologies, never mea culpas with anybody who produced or created his show or any of the ex-wives. And that Scorpio overdosing and some of the substances that can come, the Mars, Neptune in Scorpio, he's actually overdosed on drugs and been hospitalized, didn't do any damage. His violence has been that he just, destroys a hotel room and pays for it. Again, very well off. The one interesting thing that I saw in his notes, and I'm just going to share this because I've never seen anybody in the entertainment world, or basically very much anybody in the public eye, really speak about this, but he's a very strong advocate of the 9/11 truth moment. Maybe that's that moon in Sag in the 8th house. Could be that south node in Sag too. He believed that the 9/11 attacks on the World Trade Center, he thought that the collapse of the World Trade Center was a controlled demolition. And so he backs that 9/11 truth movement to really look at what happened during 9/11, and he thinks that it was orchestrated by the administration of President George W. Bush. Now, if any of you have not seen the movies Zeitgeist, 1 and 2, I think it's Zietgeist, Zeitgeist 1 and 2, they go into deep, deep detail about feeling that the collapse of the World Trade Centers in 9/11 was just exactly that, controlled demolition. And I agree with that personally. And Zeitgeist also works with the truth of what's happening on financial levels too. So very interesting movies if you care to see those. Go
Yeah,
ahead, Leroy.
the images in the movie were pretty difficult to denounce. Yeah. So again, it's a controversial subject, so I'll just let it lie there. But uh, I'm starting to think this Chiron new phase Saturn is a drug addiction archetype, especially in Pisces. I mean, this our first example tonight had the same. Uh,
Well, I
uh,
got 1965 babies with both Robert Downey and Charlie Sheen.
of course, so in
And
Pisces,
you're just looking at it in a little bit different way. Robert
and,
Downey,
and in a fixed house, like I think
yes,
Robert Downey's was
yes.
in the eighth, if I remember.
No, he was second house Pluto.
Okay.
Here we have a fifth house Pluto. All right, and so you could look at but what you're seeing is, yes, there's other archetypes in here with the addictions, but the point to be made is with the fixed modality is whatever bandwagon they get on, they write it and write it and
And
write
ride
it
it.
until they collapse it into the mutable.
Yeah.
Now look at this chart here. He has Taurus intercepted in the 12th, and he has Scorpio intercepted in the 6th. There you can see addiction through all those archetypes, including the Mars Neptune as well. So there's multiple ways in which you can see this addiction archetype. But what I was picking up on with Charlie Sheen as an example is over the top energy with his emotions. And he gets on that emotional bandwagon and he can't stop. He could be a rageaholic without the alcohol. He could go drug free, and that doesn't mean he's going to stop being over the top emotionally. That's the point that I make with this example. Anybody else? Questions, comments, or anything? We'll move on to our last modality. And so here we come to the fixed modality archetype of Aquarius. Again, now the polarity element turns active again, which is energy moving outward from the center. And here we move into the element of air, which is mental. So we have active fixed air. And so through Aquarius, the fixed energy can become mentally obsessive or sustaining or persevering. As with any of the fixed modalities, good or bad. From a more positive note, okay, that fixed air energy, the inventor. Well, yeah, you can see where the active polarity comes into. The inventor, the revolutionary, the rebellion, the liberator. You can just see that first of all, the active energy sparks it, but that fixed air then just follows through, and they follow through mentally until something from a perspective of knowledge breaks through. Now get this one, with your poll question. That fixed air is known as telepathic, long-term memory, long-term fixed modality. We can carry that mental memory. We can just sustain it backwards in time. We can sustain that mental energy forwards in time. Long-term memory going backwards, the ability to go back into past lives, to go back into the unconsciousness. That long-term memory sustaining the mental element forward, we get telepathy. We get what we would call the blueprints of the future with this archetype. We get those sparks of insight. How many of you have heard? I mean, I have seen this again and again with Pluto in the 11th house, regardless of the sign, that these people get these amazing insights about the future, sustained mental energy going forward. And lo and behold, it'll come to pass. Leroy, we can give the example, I think, of, for those of you who are not aware of this, I'm stepmom to Leroy's son, and both Leroy and I were close to our son's mother, who's been gone for 2 years. She was an 11th house Pluto. When her and Leroy were in relationship, she woke up from a dream one day and said, "You got to go buy a lotto ticket. I've got the numbers. Write them down." And Leroy wrote down the numbers, and she missed it by one number. Leroy was almost a multimillionaire. I would have been out of the picture. Maybe not. Who knows? And I'm familiar with this with 11th house Plutos, that they will have that far insight, fixed modality into the future on a mental level. Now, one of the things that I'll also see happen with this modality is the mental freeze-ups. If they're not feeling secure, fixed energy, fixed modality has to feel safe and secure. If they're not feeling safe and secure in their environment, they'll just mentally freeze up or mentally go into their traumas. And I've seen, I'm using 11th house Plutos as an example. I've seen them just totally
overreact to the simplest statement, air, mental, and just go into this circular thinking that becomes very fragmented, very traumatic, because it's either triggering them or it's undermining their sense of feeling mentally safe, of feeling, again, fixed energy, that my world is sustainable as I perceive it. You can easily see from here with the fixed modality and the air element, the like-mindedness. We're used to that Aquarian term of friends. Well, it's also tribe or community. I use those words instead of friends. And so it's those that think like us. It's those that perceive things like us. And going through time, how many of us, when we look at that element of friendship, we look at that preservation of friendship or community over long periods of time, the fixed modality. When we look at some of that distortions, we're finding it more and more common to look at Aquarius, 11th house in Aquarius with PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder, or where that long-term far memory will hold trauma. What happens when somebody is suffering PTSD? It is a circle with the mind. They keep reliving some traumatic memory and they get stuck, fixed modality, and reliving that memory, and they can't get out of it. And so if you're going to be working with, people who have a lot of Aquarius, 11th house, or Uranus in their chart, or who have manifested PTSD, or are working with mental imbalances, you're going to want to change the fixed modality. And you're going to want to change it on a mental level. You're going to want to work with them to move into that cardinal, to initiate something different versus being stuck in the thoughts, stuck in the mental fragments, stuck in the circular thinking. The example that I came up with this one is Paul Newman. And after I put Charlie Sheen in, I thought, I need to have a positive example. And as I was reviewing charts and I saw him with Sun conjunct the South Node in Aquarius, it was like, here is someone in which we have a very positive example of the fixed modality through Aquarius. He was a long-term actor. He was in acting for I don't know how long. He actually was in World War II. He wanted to be a pilot, but he was colorblind. And so he had to become a rear seat radio man and gunner in the bombing planes. And he barely missed being killed. He was assigned on a unit, but his pilot couldn't fly due to a health issue, and he had to remain behind, and everybody else who went out in their group was killed except for Paul Newman and his pilot. He really didn't want to go into acting. It was something that he just kind of fell into. But what I thought was so interesting about him was many of you might be familiar with Newman's Own, OWN, his line of food products. It was started in 1982, and between 1982 and 2013, his company, Newman's Own, has donated $380 million to charity. All proceeds and royalties from any of his food line products are donated. And one of his donations is to his Hole in the Wall Gang camp that's coming from his movie Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid with Robert Redford. These are camps that are now all over the world that basically help children. Help children who are traumatized, help children who are poor, help children who don't have any other opportunities to become creative in the world. Now that is that Sun-South node in Aquarius with that fixed modality of that long-term insightfulness to really look into the future and give to the future. That is, sometimes that Aquarian energy will be known for philanthropy, the insight, the inventor, that forward thinking. He has done it. He also has been married. He was married for over 50 years, which is something not real well known in Hollywood. He did have a short marriage to another woman, and the woman met the person that he married for 50 years, Joan Woodward. They did gazillion films together. He did meet her while he was married to his first wife. They divorced, and then he married Joan Woodward, and they were married for over 50 years. He was also a race car driver. That military past, he became very interested in race car driving. Fixed air, just sustaining that energy to go fast, active polarity. So active fixed air, polarity modality element, active fixed air. The race car driver zooming around the race car track multiple times. I thought, I get that one. And so he not only raced the cars, he created training for car racers, and he owned a car racing company. So that air, energy, just going and going and going and going. For him, it came through in the auto racing. He was also not just his own Newman's Own that he started. He's a well-known philanthropist while he was alive in giving money to all kinds of different charities, be they religious, be they for children, very big political contributor on the Democratic side. And so what I'm really seeing again with that Aquarian archetype of the fixed air and active is just someone who was very, very forward thinking. For those of you who are not familiar with this, when evolutionary astrology sees a planet conjunct the south node of the moon, as is the case here for Paul Newman, they either have a relive situation or a fruition situation. Relive means something wasn't quite completed from the past, so they've got to relive it, redo it, try to learn the lesson. The fruition situation means they've put so much effort into a certain area that this time they're reaping the rewards and the fruits of their previous labors. The third condition is by far the most common, and that's a blend of relive and fruition. I have a tendency in just what I've reviewed for Paul Newman is that he was really on the fruition end of things. Maybe there were some things he relived early on in his life, but as you really look at what he did in his life, he was a pioneer and very forward thinking, and that's that blend, bringing in that first house as well with the cardinal modality. There's the pioneer with all of his foresight that fixed modality of Aquarius looking into the future. All right. Comments or questions from anybody on anything that I've said tonight? You're getting a handle on what that fixed modality is actually like now. Very persevering, very sustaining. Whatever bandwagon they get on, physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, they sustain it. They keep going with it. It will describe something that is innate within them. It will also describe something that we are in process of learning, moving forward with. As I said in the beginning, what cardinal initiates fixed modality will sustain. And eventually, as that becomes outworn, it has to surrender to the adaptation of the mutable modality. Comments, questions on anything?
Pretty quiet on the
All
board,
right.
Kim. Nice job.
All right, so here you are one more time with the fixed modality as you see it on the circle. And of course, remember that we will finish up this modality series with the mutable modality on October 29th. And then the following week after that, as we pick this up, we're going to go in a 3-week series here of finishing up mutable and then moving into the fire element and the earth element. So thank you everyone for for showing up and your interest in learning about the 3 modalities and the 4 elements. And I wish you all the best with your astrological studies. Thank you.